The 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s were said to be bodybuilding's golden era. With names like Sergio Oliva, Frank Zane, and of course Arnold, bodybuilding had never been so mainstream. With the fitness revolution taking off and sparking an insane interest in aesthetic physiques, the biggest names of the golden era would eventually become international superstars, inspiring an entire generation of people to get in the gym. But then came Dorian Yates.
There's no way, I'm prepared psychologically. I believe in myself and, I'm coming to show everybody what I've done.
He ushered in the mass monster era of the 90s and changed bodybuilding forever. Everyone else had to get bigger, drier, and freakier. The allure for aesthetics and balance was replaced with the freak factor, producing physiques that the sport had never seen before. While it repelled many golden era fans and pushed bodybuilding away from the overall general public, it gave us Paul Dillette, Kevin Levrone, Jay Cutler, and the man who tested the boundaries of the human body's growth. Having to compete with the massive Dorian and then Ronnie forced the rest of the Ifbb to either get big or retire. While some would call it quits and focus on life outside of bodybuilding, others would embrace the new era and carve out their own legacies. So, the torch got passed to Jay, who passed it to Dexter, who then passed it back to Jay, who passed it to the man who would become the most dominant force in bodybuilding since Ronnie Coleman.
Walking around the expos next to Jay, having the rivalry build up, not just with the fans, but he and I, and just realizing that these competitive juices you feel are gonna what make you into the champion that you're gonna be on Saturday night.
Phil Heath at the beginning of his reign was the perfect combination of size, aesthetics, and proportion, and anyone who didn't see him coming was clearly not paying attention because Phil had the makings of a generationally dominant bodybuilder, which is why he was rightfully called the Gift. However, as Phil's reign went on and he prioritized more size, his aesthetics began to fade, something which didn't matter initially since the judges didn't seem to mind. However, despite some of Phil's imperfections, he still brought enough to win every year. But as time went on, the scrutiny began to mount. The fans were slowly becoming jaded by the mass monster era.
It's stale and attendance gets low because it's like, oh, he's gonna win again, you know what? I'm gonna go gamble and go party before I go here.
Predictable, right?
And go to a predictable Mr. Olympia, so.
The emphasis on size had become boring and increasingly dangerous as the deaths in the industry were mounting, and many fans were criticizing judges all across the Ifbb and NPC for allowing the sport to deviate from the balance that it once had.
Since you complain my belly, I sleep and only think I'm not talking about my belly.
Louis Marco put it a very good way. He said all these body parts are connected to the gut, and the gut kind of links it all together. So in those shots, the gut definitely compromises a lot of those front shots and makes him look worse compared to Rami.
The 7-time Mr. Olympia, Phil the Gift Heath.
To a lot of fans, as long as Phil Heath kept winning, nothing was going to change. Or so they thought.
I've had plenty of time this year to get my shit together to come back here and get back on the stage and present myself as Mr. Olympia.
In 2018, Rhoden defeated Phil Heath in one of the greatest battles in the history of the open division. Why? Well, because Sean was a scrappy underdog who, after years of having to persevere through adversity, finally brought his best against a juggernaut Phil Heath, who was on the quest for his 8th Sandow. And Sean exposed Phil Heath just like he said he would.
Yes, he has, probably one of the best back in the history of bodybuilding. That doesn't mean that, if, someone like myself that work on everything that I need to work on, bring my back up and go blow for blow each pose. At the end of the day, condition, shape, size. I mean, this is the biggest I've ever been, 262, 3 weeks out from the Olympia. And, the hardest I've ever been, so.
The combination of mass and aesthetics he brought was impeccable. He was a bit downsized from the year before, but that allowed him to bring a tighter and crisper package, his best package to date. A package which was the opposite of Phil's on that night. And when Sean's name would be called as a new Mr. Olympia, he proved a few things. One, that bigger wasn't necessarily better anymore, especially if that size couldn't compensate for the other deficiencies on the physique.
That's one of those things that was like, he was good enough to win, and Phil had this one small issue that we can use it as an excuse for him to lose.
But the second thing that Sean's win showed was that bodybuilding was entering a new era. An era that would likely be led by Rhoden, as he was looking like he was going to be very difficult to beat, but unfortunately, that wouldn't be the case.
In a year or two of just death after death after death, these reports are very difficult for me to do, especially when I have relationships with some of these athletes that have passed on us. Obviously, Rhoden, one of the most gifted bodybuilders of our modern time, won the 2018 Mr. Olympia and probably would have won several more.
On November 6, 2021, Rhoden would tragically pass away, and with him, the hopes and anticipation of a new reign. Sean had brought to the stage one of the most aesthetic and complete packages that the open division had seen in a while, and represented a shift in what the new criteria for open bodybuilding would eventually become. But with his untimely loss and Phil Heath's future in bodybuilding indefinite, there was no clear frontrunner for the Olympia throne, nor was there a standard physique that the other open pros could try to beat. And it would be at this point where the newest, most recent era of bodybuilding would begin. The era where the reigning Mr. Olympia was not safe. When looking back at the 57-year history of the Mr. Olympia, there have been a total of 16 champions. Some of those champions have had shorter runs, while some have gone on to dominate an entire generation. However, with the end of each generation has come a transition period, because with the fall of each dominant champion comes a changing of the guard, a change which has happened both swiftly and sporadically. For example, the end of Sergio Oliva's reign marked the smooth transition of dominance because once Arnold took the throne, there was no looking back. Because Arnold was the heir apparent, a consistent theme when we look at the history of bodybuilding. At the end of every dominant champion's reign, there's a generationally great talent waiting in the wings to take their spot and dominate as well.
But you know, I heard a lot about Dorian prior to the 91 Olympia. And all this talk, I hadn't seen it. But I heard about him, and golly, man, he said, this guy's big, he got size just like you do, and da-da-da. So anyway, when Dorian stepped on the stage, I said, oh my goodness, another one like me.
That transition has not always been smooth. Take, for instance, the first 5 years of the 1980s where we had 5 different Olympia champions. At the beginning of the decade, Arnold had made his comeback and won his final Olympia. And then came Franco, Chris Dickerson, and Samir Banu. And although they were deserving champions for the year, they were never able to dominate the competition and become the new standard. This was until Lee Haney won in 1984, and the rest was history. But that parity that we saw in the 1980s is very similar to what we've been seeing in the last 5 years in the Open, where we've had 4 different champions in the last 5 years, and the closest champion to a generationally great talent that we've had has seen a significant drop-off in his last few competitions. If you ask most bodybuilding fans what the future of the division would look like this time last year, most would tell you that Ramy was poised to win the Olympia, Nick Walker was clearly the future, and Derek Lunsford would stay in 212. Oh, how quickly things can change. Because all of my previous statements either did not come true or are not as sure as many thought they were. Ramy not only lost the Olympia, but fell a staggering 4 places. Nick Walker is still the future, but now has to jostle with 2 other really impressive guys on his heels. And Derek not only moved to the Open, but became a legitimate contender, like, immediately. Also, at this point last year, Samson Dauda was someone that only had a ton of potential that was untapped. When we'd see him finally reach that potential was anyone's guess.
Listen, I really feel like Samson is standing out right now in this lineup, which is incredible because he's come from nowhere, and all of a sudden become a great competitor. Justin and Sam.
But as of right now, Samson is the reigning Arnold Classic champion. He finished 4th last year at the Arnold, and from then on became a legitimate Dark Horse candidate for the rest of the 2022 season. And he showed up at the Olympia significantly better, and then made an even bigger improvement at the Arnold Classic, and in the process, he upset the heavy favorite in Nick Walker and shook the entire landscape of the Open division immediately, reminding us fans that as fun as it is to predict future placings, we have zero way or means to truly know how a competitor is going to come in on show day. Now, Samson's victory exemplifies just how much parity we've gotten in the Open division over these last few years, and it feels as if every season that parity becomes greater. This time last year, people were still wondering if Andrew Jack could even compete at the highest level. See, Andrew had been doubted for a considerable amount of time early on in his career due to his reputation as a social media bodybuilder. And in case you didn't know, real bodybuilders are not fond of them. So it felt like Andrew's physique was just never going to be given the benefit of the doubt. He would have to earn his respect. which he immediately did with back-to-back wins and a top 10 finish at the Olympia.
I'm like, his arms are not big enough and his shoulders are not round enough.
I could kind of see that. Yeah, I mean, his arm.
If he walks on the Olympia stage next.
No, we're talking about Texas. We're talking about
Queen. No. I know. What I'm saying is, like, look at his quads and then look at his arms, right?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
There's a big gap there.
And with a top 3 finish at the Arnold Classic, along with the Best Poser award, I think it's safe to say that Andrew Jack has definitely exceeded expectations. Sean Clarita, on the other hand, was not picked by anyone to win the Arnold Classic, yet his shape and conditioning compared very well against the Giants, and he was fighting for 4th place with a former 2-time Mr. Olympia champion. Hell, even Akeem Williams, who's historically struggled with conditioning, came in pretty peeled at the Arnold Classic. I say all of that to say that the current landscape of open bodybuilding is in a very interesting yet exciting place right now. As the competition continues to improve year over year in every single show, it's almost as if the art is finally caught up from the competitive slump of COVID and birthed tons of new fans since that time. With those new fans comes more exposure and more money to the Ifbb, who at the end of the day is a business. It's no secret that the appeal of open bodybuilding became freaks in the 90s, which did turn off a lot of casual fans, so to satisfy the desire to see those aesthetics, they introduced classic and men's physique, all in an effort to create some balance.
As you watch the classic competitors on stage, what are your thoughts as to how that class is evolving and the physiques that we're seeing on stage?
I think it's terrific because I don't want the big bodybuilders that are just monsters and weigh 300 pounds disappear. But what I want to do is I want to keep the traditional kind of a physique alive that we had in our days.
But since Sean Rhoden took over that Olympia title, we've seen the judges try to bring that balance back to the open division as well. And those subtle shifts in the way that judges have been rewarding physiques has definitely changed the qualities that bodybuilders have to start prioritizing. So gone are the days when the topic of conversation was bubble guts.
Nobody has a distended stomach, everybody has a flat stomach. I mean, they're controlling the midsection. I'd really love to see that. Yeah.
Gone are the days when open bodybuilders couldn't hit vacuums anymore. Because now we've entered bodybuilding's newest era, the era where no reigning champion is safe and the freaks are also aesthetic, the era that we've all been waiting for. Some people want to call it the masthetic era, but ultimately you can call it whatever you want. Because it seems like the mass of the 1990s is crossing over with the aesthetics of the 70s and 80s, which will inevitably produce physiques that open bodybuilding hasn't seen in a really long time, and also bring back the wow factor that the division has been missing. With guys like Hadi Choopan, Samson Dauda, Nick Walker, Derek Lunsford, and the endless list of names that have been rising in the open, there's no way to predict who's going to come out on top year over year. But if history repeats itself, then the end of this 5-year stretch is going to be the beginning of the reign of the next dominant champion, or one of the other rapidly improving pros waiting in the wings to take the title and make this new era even more interesting. And as fun as it is to speculate, the truth is, we have no idea what's going to happen. But what do you guys think? Is this last 5-year stretch just the setup for bodybuilding's next generationally dominant Olympia champion? Or will this era be defined by having the most parity we've ever seen in bodybuilding history? Only time will tell. I'm Large Kofi. Thank you for watching.
I'm so excited that those guys came in such unbelievable shape. It's really fantastic to see that. It makes me really happy.